In the dimly lit corridors of an ancient starship, suspended in the vast expanse between galaxies, a peculiar event was unfolding. The vessel, a masterpiece of crystalline architecture that refracted light into cascading rainbows, belonged to the Luminari, a species whose existence had long been whispered about in human science fiction circles. At its helm stood Queen Seraphina, a being whose beauty transcended mere physical description. Her presence commanded awe and reverence from even the most seasoned intergalactic diplomats. Queen Seraphina's arrival on Earth had been as unexpected as it was unprecedented. Her ship descended silently over the Pacific Ocean, casting shimmering reflections across the water's surface before settling gently on a remote island. The world watched in collective astonishment as she emerged, her form radiating an ethereal glow that seemed to bend reality itself around her. Her skin shimmered like liquid moonlight, and her eyes held galaxies within their depths, constantly shifting patterns of stars and nebulae. The circumstances surrounding her visit were shrouded in mystery. World leaders scrambled to understand her intentions while scientists debated the implications of her advanced technology. Yet despite the chaos her appearance created among human authorities, Seraphina showed little interest in governments or military might. Instead, she requested something entirely unexpected: access to ordinary human males. Not warriors or leaders, not scientists or artists, but common men from various walks of life. Her reasons remained enigmatic, communicated through a translator device that struggled to capture the nuances of her melodic speech. She spoke of understanding humanity's essence, of studying the core of what made humans unique among the cosmos. Each day, different men were brought before her, not by force, but through carefully orchestrated invitations extended through diplomatic channels. Some came willingly, driven by curiosity or ambition. Others required more convincing, their fear of the unknown outweighing their desire for adventure. Among these men, there existed a pattern that escaped human comprehension. Seraphina would observe them with an intensity that made grown men tremble, her gaze piercing through layers of personality and experience. She would ask questions that seemed simple on the surface but carried profound implications about human nature, relationships, and emotions. Her chambers became filled with artifacts of human culture, books dog-eared from careful study, music systems playing everything from classical symphonies to underground hip-hop, and walls covered with sketches and paintings she had commissioned from various artists. Yet beneath this apparent fascination with human culture lay something deeper, something that neither human observers nor her own advisors could fully grasp. There was purpose in her scrutiny, a method to her seemingly random selection process that suggested she was searching for something specific. Something vital. The tension in the air grew palpable as weeks turned into months, with each new visitor bringing both hope and disappointment in equal measure. The current subject of her attention sat nervously across from her, perched on the edge of an elegantly minimalist chair that seemed to float 3 inches above the floor. His name was Daniel Harper, a 34-year-old librarian from Portland whose biggest claim to fame had been organizing community book clubs. He represented everything ordinary about human existence, neither particularly handsome nor especially brilliant, possessing no remarkable talents beyond his ability to connect people through stories. Daniel felt the weight of Seraphina's gaze as it moved over him, analyzing every nervous tick and subtle movement. Her chamber, bathed in soft luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very air, contained no visible monitoring equipment, yet he felt more exposed than if he'd been hooked up to countless wires and sensors. The queen's posture was deceptively relaxed, reclining on what appeared to be a throne carved from living crystal that pulsed gently with her breaths. "You fidget when you're anxious," Seraphina observed, her voice carrying a resonance that made Daniel's chest vibrate. "But your heart rate remains steady. Your palms are dry despite the moisture collecting at your temples." She paused, tilting her head in a manner that reminded him unsettlingly of how one might study an interesting insect. Most humans would have perspired profusely by now. Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. I'm just trying to stay calm, Your Majesty." The formal address felt inadequate, yet anything else seemed equally inappropriate. "You've said you want to understand us better. Maybe I'm just focusing on helping with that instead of worrying about myself." A delicate eyebrow arched upward, causing constellations to dance across her forehead. An intriguing response. "You deflect personal discomfort by focusing on the greater purpose. Tell me, Daniel Harper, do all humans possess such capacity for self-sacrifice? Or is this another manifestation of your species' complex social dynamics?" He shifted slightly, then caught himself and forced his muscles to still. It's complicated. We help each other because we have to. Because nobody makes it through life alone. But sometimes we help because it feels right, even when there's nothing in it for us personally. Seraphina leaned forward infinitesimally, her movements so graceful they seemed choreographed by cosmic forces. And what of love? That most perplexing of human concepts. Your literature suggests it drives many of your actions, yet it appears illogical from an evolutionary perspective. Why risk everything for such an ephemeral emotion? Daniel's fingers traced the edge of his chair, a nervous habit he hadn't displayed since childhood. Love isn't just one thing. It's not always logical, sure. Sometimes it's messy and painful and doesn't make any sense at all. But when it works, when two people truly connect, it's like finding home in another person, even if it only lasts for a moment. The Queen's luminous eyes narrowed slightly, galaxies swirling faster within their depths. Your species clings to such fleeting moments. You build entire lives around connections that may last mere decades in cosmic terms. Is this why you fight so fiercely to preserve your planet? To maintain these fragile bonds? It's not just about preserving the planet, Daniel replied, surprising himself with his confidence. It's about creating more moments. More chances for people to find those connections. Even if they don't last forever, they matter while they're happening. They change people. They make life worth living. For the first time during their encounter, Seraphina's perfect composure faltered. Her hand, resting delicately on the arm of her crystalline throne, twitched imperceptibly. The pulsing light of her seat accelerated briefly before returning to its previous rhythm. She studied Daniel with renewed intensity, as if seeing him through multiple dimensions simultaneously. "You speak of connection," she murmured, almost to herself. "Of home within another. Of moments that transcend their temporal limitations." She rose gracefully, her flowing robes catching and bending light into impossible patterns. Few of your kind have articulated these concepts with such clarity. Fewer still have demonstrated them through their very presence. As she circled around him, Daniel fought the urge to turn and follow her movement. The air seemed charged with static electricity, raising fine hairs on his arms and neck. "Your species fascinates me," Seraphina continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that resonated through his very bones. "You create art that moves even my people to tears. You compose music that echoes through the fabric of space-time itself. And yet you remain oblivious to your own significance in the grand tapestry of existence." She stopped directly behind him, close enough that he could feel the subtle displacement of air as she moved. Her presence pressed against his consciousness like a gentle tide against a shoreline. "Tell me, Daniel Harper, what would you sacrifice to preserve these connections you hold so dear? What lengths would you go to protect the possibility of finding home in another?" His throat tightened, but he forced himself to answer. "Everything. If it meant keeping those possibilities alive, I'd give everything I have. Because without that hope, without the chance to connect, we're just animals surviving from day to day." He turned slightly, catching a glimpse of her radiant profile. "Isn't that why you're here? Isn't that what you're looking for too?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Seraphina's expression shifted subtly, though whether in surprise, satisfaction, or something else entirely, Daniel couldn't determine. Around them, the chamber responded to her emotional state, colors shifting and patterns emerging in the walls that seemed to echo her internal turmoil. "I have studied countless species across the stars," she admitted, her voice barely audible yet filling the room completely. "None possess this paradoxical combination of fragility and strength. None invest so much meaning into such transient experiences." She moved back around to face him, her movements now carrying a hint of uncertainty, an unprecedented display for one of her station. "Your words resonate with something deep within me, something I had thought lost to the ages." Daniel found himself rising to his feet, drawn by some invisible force that made sitting seem intolerable. "Maybe that's why you chose to study us. Maybe you recognized something familiar in us, something you thought you'd forgotten." The Queen's hand lifted, hesitated in mid-air, then slowly extended toward him. Her touch, when it finally came to rest against his cheek, sent waves of sensation coursing through his body. Heat and cold, pleasure and pain, all mixed together in an overwhelming cocktail of stimuli. Through this contact, images flooded his mind. Civilizations rising and falling, stars being born and dying, endless cycles of creation and destruction stretching back eons. "You see," she whispered, her voice trembling with an emotion that transcended human understanding. "This is what I have sought. This raw, unfiltered connection that bypasses language and logic. This." Her hand withdrew suddenly, as if burned. "This is dangerous." The chamber's atmosphere thickened, becoming almost tangible. Colors swirled violently around them, reflecting the turmoil within Seraphina. "My people abandoned such vulnerabilities millennia ago," she confessed, pacing now with agitated steps that left trails of light in their wake. "We evolved beyond the need for such attachments. Yet here you stand, reminding me of what we sacrificed in our pursuit of perfection." Daniel remained rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was unfolding. "Sometimes perfection isn't everything it's cracked up to be," he ventured cautiously. Maybe there's value in imperfection. In being vulnerable enough to care about someone or something more than yourself." Seraphina halted abruptly, turning to face him with an expression that combined wonder and sorrow in equal measure. "Do you comprehend the weight of what you suggest? The implications of reintroducing such fundamental weaknesses into my society? The potential consequences for both our peoples?" Before Daniel could respond, the Queen raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture that carried the authority of centuries. "No. Do not answer. This decision cannot be made lightly. Nor can it be made based solely on the desires of one individual." She moved to a crystalline console that materialized from the wall at her approach, her fingers dancing across its surface in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. The chamber transformed around them, walls dissolving into views of distant stars and nebulae. "I must consult with my council," she announced, though her tone suggested she was speaking more to herself than to him. "They will demand explanations, seek logical justifications for what I propose. Yet how does one quantify the value of emotional connection? How does one measure the worth of vulnerability in purely practical terms?" She turned back to Daniel, her eyes now burning with a fierce intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. "You must remain here, under protection, until I return with their verdict." The command brooked no argument, yet her voice softened as she added, "You have given me much to consider, Daniel Harper. Perhaps more than anyone has in countless generations." As she prepared to depart, Daniel found his voice again. "What exactly am I supposed to do while I wait?" The question came out more sarcastic than he intended, but Seraphina merely smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her already breathtaking features into something almost unbearable to behold. "Contemplate your own courage," she replied, stepping onto a platform that began to rise toward the ceiling. "Consider what it means to stand before a queen of the stars and speak your truth without hesitation. And perhaps prepare yourself for the possibility that your words may alter the course of two civilizations." With that, she ascended through the ceiling, leaving Daniel alone in the suddenly cavernous chamber, surrounded by the infinite vastness of space displayed on every wall. The hours passed in a haze of contemplation and growing anxiety. Daniel paced the crystalline chamber, his footsteps echoing through the vast space as stars wheeled endlessly around him. The Queen's parting words reverberated in his mind, their implications expanding with each passing moment. He found himself oscillating between disbelief at his current situation and terror at the potential consequences of his conversation with Seraphina. From hidden alcoves in the walls, holographic projections began to emerge, images of luminary history unfolding in silent tableaus. Ancient battles fought with weapons that bent reality itself, cities constructed from pure energy, cultural ceremonies that seemed to manipulate the very fabric of spacetime. Yet interspersed among these displays of technological and cultural achievement were moments of stark emptiness. Figures standing alone amidst opulent surroundings, eyes devoid of the warmth and connection that characterized human gatherings. These visual narratives painted a picture of a civilization that had mastered nearly every aspect of existence except the most fundamental: the ability to form genuine, vulnerable connections. Daniel watched as generations of Luminari pursued knowledge, power, and perfection, only to find themselves increasingly isolated in their achievements. His contrast with human society struck him with renewed force. The way humans crowded together in cities, celebrated holidays with family, mourned losses collectively. It all seemed so precious now, viewed through the lens of Seraphina's people's sacrifices. His thoughts kept returning to Seraphina's reaction to his words, to the moment when her perfect composure had cracked ever so slightly. Had he truly touched something buried deep within her? Or had he merely triggered some ancient programming, some vestigial remnant of what her species had once been? The memory of her touch against his cheek sent shivers down his spine, the sensory overload of that moment still fresh in his mind. He had glimpsed something vast and ancient through that contact, emotions and experiences far beyond human comprehension. The chamber's atmosphere shifted subtly as twilight approached on Earth. The projected stars dimmed slightly, mimicking the natural cycle of nightfall. Daniel realized with a start that he could actually see Earth from this vantage point, a blue-green marble hanging in the void, insignificant in size yet overwhelmingly significant in its implications. The word resonated through him with new meaning, carrying with it memories of rainy afternoons in the library, shared laughter with friends, quiet moments with loved ones. His musings were interrupted by the arrival of several luminary attendants, their forms less radiant than Seraphina's but still awe-inspiring in their own right. They brought food, human food, surprisingly, and various items that suggested they had been studying human comfort requirements. The gesture felt strangely intimate, as if Seraphina had anticipated his needs despite her absence. Among the items was a small collection of books, including several volumes from his personal favorite authors. As he ate, Daniel found himself considering the broader implications of Seraphina's dilemma. If she chose to pursue this path of rediscovery, what would it mean for her people? Could an entire civilization relearn how to be vulnerable after millennia of pursuing the opposite? And what role was he supposed to play in this potential transformation? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than anything he had experienced in his relatively simple life as a librarian. The attendants, sensing his distress, began projecting calming images throughout the chamber. Gentle waves lapping at shorelines, forests dappled with sunlight, children laughing in playgrounds. These scenes of earthly tranquility contrasted sharply with the cosmic grandeur surrounding him, yet somehow they complemented each other perfectly. Daniel realized that Seraphina's people, in their quest for perfection, had perhaps forgotten that beauty often resided in imperfection, in the unpredictable nature of organic life. Hours stretched into what felt like days, though the passage of time became increasingly difficult to track. Without windows or conventional clocks, Daniel relied on the artificial day-night cycle maintained by the chamber. His mind kept returning to Seraphina's council, imagining their deliberations. Would they view his words as a threat to their carefully constructed society? Or would they recognize, as he hoped Seraphina had, the value in embracing vulnerability? The longer he waited, the more certain he became that whatever decision Seraphina and her council reached would fundamentally alter the relationship between their species. The idea that his simple observations about human nature might influence the course of galactic history filled him with both pride and terror. He found himself wishing desperately for some form of guidance, some wisdom beyond his own limited experience. As if responding to his unspoken plea, the chamber's walls began displaying scenes from human history. Moments of great connection and terrible division, acts of courage and instances of cowardice. These images seemed curated specifically to highlight humanity's capacity for both incredible compassion and devastating cruelty. Daniel understood the message immediately. Seraphina's people needed to understand the full spectrum of human nature before making their decision. The weight of representing his entire species pressed down on him anew. Every flaw, every triumph, every moment of weakness and strength. He carried them all in this chamber, waiting for judgment from beings who had long considered themselves beyond such concerns. Yet as he watched these historical vignettes unfold, he found himself drawing strength from humanity's resilience, from its ability to rise above its worst instincts and reach for something better. When Seraphina finally returned, the chamber reacted with a symphony of light and sound that seemed to echo through Daniel's very soul. She entered alone, her usual retinue conspicuously absent, her form radiating an intensity that made the earlier encounters seem tame by comparison. The galaxy-like patterns in her eyes swirled with unprecedented speed, suggesting inner turmoil that defied easy interpretation. "The Council deliberated for 73 of your Earth hours," she began without preamble, her voice carrying the weight of monumental decisions. They argued, analyzed, calculated probabilities, and ran simulations until their processors overheated. A brief smile touched her lips, though it carried more sadness than amusement. Some advocated for immediate termination of our studies of humanity, fearing contamination of our societal structure. Others. Her voice trailed off, and she took a step closer, her presence filling the chamber with an almost tangible energy. Others saw the merit in your arguments, she continued, her words measured and precise. They recognized the emptiness that has crept into our existence, the void left by centuries of emotional detachment. But they also warned of the risks, of chaos, of regression, of losing control over aspects of our society we have spent millennia perfecting. She paused, studying him with an intensity that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. My position as queen grants me considerable authority, Seraphina explained, moving to stand beside the viewing portal that showcased Earth's rotation. But even I cannot act against the Council's wishes entirely. We have reached a compromise, one that will require immense courage from both our peoples. She turned to face him fully, her hands clasped before her in a gesture that seemed almost human in its display of nervous tension. The Council has agreed to a trial period, she announced, her voice dropping to a near whisper. A single human will be chosen to integrate with our society, to teach, to learn, to bridge the gap between our species. This individual must demonstrate the qualities you spoke of: vulnerability, connection, the willingness to risk everything for the possibility of meaningful relationships. Her eyes locked onto his, galaxies swirling with anticipation and something else, something that made Daniel's heart race despite his best efforts to remain calm. That human, she continued, taking another step closer, must be you, Daniel Harper. No other candidate has shown the combination of insight, courage, and genuine connection that you displayed during our discussions. The Council recognizes this, though they approach the decision with trepidation. She raised a hand as if to forestall his response, though he hadn't yet spoken. Understand the gravity of this choice. You would leave behind everything you know, everyone you love, to venture into a society that may never fully accept you. You would become both ambassador and experiment, teacher and student. The chamber seemed to contract around them, the vastness of space displayed on the walls feeling suddenly oppressive. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Seraphina continued, her words tumbling forth with increasing urgency. There is more. The Council has imposed conditions. They insist on a formal bond, a connection that transcends mere diplomatic arrangements. They require. She hesitated, her composure slipping momentarily as galaxies in her eyes danced erratically. They require marriage. Between us. As a symbol of unity between our species. The declaration hung in the air, vibrating through the chamber like a struck tuning fork. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath his feet, not literally, but in the fundamental understanding of his reality. Marriage to an alien queen? To a being who embodied the pinnacle of an ancient civilization's achievements? The concept stretched beyond the boundaries of his imagination, yet the sincerity in Seraphina's expression anchored it in undeniable reality. Why me? He managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Out of all the men you've studied, all the humans you've encountered. Seraphina moved closer still, until mere inches separated them. Because you embody everything my people have forgotten, she replied, her voice carrying the weight of revelation. Because you spoke truths we have long suppressed. Because... She hesitated, her perfect facade cracking ever so slightly. Because when I touched you, when I connected with you on that fundamental level, I felt something awaken within me that I had believed extinct. Something precious and terrifying and absolutely necessary for my people's evolution. The Queen's admission sent shockwaves through Daniel's consciousness. Here was a being of unimaginable power and sophistication, expressing vulnerability in a way that transcended species barriers. He found himself reaching out instinctively, his hand hovering near her cheek before he caught himself and withdrew. The gesture seemed to affect Seraphina profoundly, her eyes widening as constellations within them aligned in patterns he couldn't begin to interpret. There is risk, she acknowledged, her voice now carrying the raw edge of genuine emotion. Not just for you but for me. For my people. Such a union could destabilize centuries of carefully maintained order. It could expose weaknesses we have worked so hard to eliminate. But she closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, they burned with determination. But it could also remind us of what it means to truly live. To connect. To care deeply enough to risk everything. The chamber's atmosphere changed subtly, as if responding to the emotional intensity of their exchange. Lights dimmed and brightened in sync with their breathing, creating an intimate cocoon of shared space and time. Daniel realized that this moment, this decision, transcended individual choice. It represented a crossroads for two civilizations, a chance to redefine what it meant to evolve. Not just technologically, but emotionally and spiritually. "I cannot promise safety," Seraphina continued, her words gaining strength with each syllable. "I cannot guarantee acceptance from my people or yours. What I can offer is honesty. Partnership. The opportunity to shape the future of not just one species, but potentially many." She reached out then, her hand trembling slightly as it approached his face. "And perhaps something more. Something neither of us fully understands yet." Their eyes met, and in that instant, Daniel comprehended the true magnitude of what was being asked of him. This wasn't merely about representing humanity or teaching emotional connection to an advanced species. It was about forging a new path, one that honored both the strengths of his species and the achievements of hers. It was about creating something entirely new from the fusion of two vastly different ways of being. As Seraphina's hand finally made contact with his cheek, sending familiar waves of sensation through his body, Daniel understood that whatever decision he made would ripple through history, affecting countless lives across the stars. The Queen's touch carried with it not just the weight of expectation, but the promise of transformation, for both their peoples and perhaps for themselves as individuals. The chamber's crystalline walls began to pulse in time with their synchronized breathing, creating an aurora of colors that danced around them. Seraphina withdrew her hand slowly, leaving behind a tingling sensation that seemed to resonate through Daniel's very cells. "The Council awaits our response," she said softly, though her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "They have granted us 24 of your Earth hours to deliberate. During this time, you must consider not just what you would gain or lose, but what this union could mean for the future of connection itself." Daniel nodded, though his mind raced with possibilities and consequences that defied easy categorization. The Queen gestured toward a section of the wall that dissolved into transparency, revealing a lush garden unlike anything he'd ever seen. Plants that seemed to breathe with their own inner light stretched toward a simulated sky where multiple suns cast shifting patterns of illumination. Pathways of liquid crystal wound through the foliage, inviting exploration. "This is your sanctuary," Seraphina explained, moving to join him as he approached the threshold. "Here you may contemplate your decision without interference. My attendants will provide whatever sustenance or comfort you require, but you will remain undisturbed otherwise." She hesitated, then added, "Unless you wish my presence." The offer hung between them, laden with implications that went beyond simple companionship. Daniel found himself nodding again, though he wasn't entirely sure why. I think I'd like that," he admitted, surprised by his own response. "If we're considering, well, everything, shouldn't we understand each other better?" A flicker of something, relief? Joy, passed across Seraphina's features, causing the galaxies in her eyes to swirl in complex patterns. "Indeed," she agreed, stepping through the threshold ahead of him. "Though I warn you, human, understanding me may prove more challenging than you anticipate." Her tone carried both warning and invitation, a paradox that seemed to define their entire interaction. As they walked along the crystal paths, Daniel noticed how the plants responded to Seraphina's presence, their luminescent petals unfurling and closing in rhythmic patterns that seemed almost musical. Tiny creatures, resembling bioluminescent hummingbirds, flitted between the blooms, casting showers of colored light that illuminated the Queen's features from constantly changing angles. The effect was mesmerizing, making her appear more like a force of nature than a political figure. "You called this a trial period," Daniel ventured, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What exactly would that entail? Beyond the obvious?" He gestured vaguely between them, unsure how to articulate the enormity of their potential union. Seraphina paused by a particularly vibrant cluster of blossoms, their light reflecting off her skin in intricate patterns. 3 Earth years, she replied, plucking one of the glowing flowers and holding it between delicate fingers. During this time, you would serve as both ambassador and educator, sharing human perspectives on emotion, connection, and vulnerability. My people would observe, analyze, and hopefully, begin to integrate these concepts into their own lives. But what about you? Daniel asked, watching as she examined the flower's structure. What would this marriage mean for you personally? You're not just asking me to teach your people, you're committing yourself to something equally profound. The queen's hand stilled, and she turned to face him fully, the flower glowing softly between them like a miniature star. I am bound by duty to my people, she admitted, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. Yet I find myself contemplating possibilities I had long dismissed as irrelevant. The concept of partnership, of genuine connection beyond political necessity. She shook her head slightly, causing constellations to dance across her brow. It is both terrifying and exhilarating. They continued walking, the path leading them to a clearing where a fountain of liquid light bubbled and flowed in defiance of gravity. Seraphina seated herself on a bench formed from interwoven crystal vines, motioning for Daniel to join her. As he did, he noticed how the light from the fountain seemed to harmonize with her natural radiance, creating an aura that made his chest tighten with emotions he couldn't quite name. What frightens you most about this? He asked, surprising himself with the directness of the question. About me? About humans? Seraphina's response was immediate and unguarded, revealing depths of vulnerability that contradicted her regal bearing. That I might fail, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. That I might lead my people down a path of chaos and destruction. That I might lose myself in the process of rediscovery. She turned to face him, her galaxy-filled eyes burning with intensity. And most frightening of all, that I might succeed, only to find that success demands more of me than I am willing to give. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications that transcended their immediate situation. Daniel found himself reaching out impulsively, his hand covering hers where it rested on the bench. The contact sent familiar waves of sensation through him, but this time he didn't withdraw. Instead, he focused on the warmth of her skin beneath his palm, the subtle pulse of life that belied her ethereal appearance. You're not alone in this, he said softly, marveling at how natural it felt to offer comfort to a being who commanded galaxies. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Isn't that what partnership means? The words felt strange coming from him, yet they carried an authenticity that resonated through the garden, causing nearby blossoms to bloom in sudden bursts of light. Seraphina's free hand came up to cover theirs, creating a human-alien connection that seemed to vibrate with possibilities. Together, she echoed, testing the word as if it were new to her vocabulary. A concept both beautiful and terrifying in its implications. She looked up at the simulated sky, where clouds of light drifted in patterns reminiscent of Earth's northern lights. Tell me, Daniel Harper, what would you require of me in this partnership? What assurances would ease your fears? The question caught him off guard, forcing him to confront the reality of what they were considering. Honesty, he replied after a moment's thought. Complete honesty, even when it's difficult. I need to know that we're building something real, not just maintaining appearances for the sake of politics or tradition. He squeezed her hand gently. And I need to know that you're willing to be vulnerable too. That this isn't just about me teaching your people, it's about both of us learning from each other. The Queen's response was a slow smile that transformed her features, making her appear simultaneously more approachable and more majestic. Vulnerability, she repeated, tasting the word. A concept that terrifies my people yet intrigues them. Perhaps that is where our journey should begin, not with grand declarations or elaborate ceremonies, but with simple, honest connection. As they sat there, hand in hand beneath the artificial sky, Daniel felt the enormity of their potential union settle over him like a second skin. This wasn't just about bridging two species or fulfilling political obligations. It was about creating something entirely new, something that honored both their strengths and acknowledged their weaknesses. The thought should have terrified him, yet instead, he found himself filled with a quiet excitement, a sense that they were standing on the threshold of something truly extraordinary. The remaining hours of their deliberation period passed in a blur of intense conversation and shared silences that spoke louder than words. As midnight approached, the deadline set by the council, Seraphina led Daniel back to the central chamber where their journey had begun. The crystalline walls now reflected both their forms, human and luminary, creating a kaleidoscope of possibilities that danced across the surfaces. "We must decide," Seraphina announced, though her tone suggested she had already reached her conclusion. "The council awaits our response, and with it, the fate of our people's future relationship." She moved to stand before the main console, her hands hovering above the controls that would transmit their decision across her empire. "What say you, Daniel Harper? Will you take this leap into the unknown, bind yourself to a queen of the stars, and help guide two civilizations toward a new understanding of existence?" Daniel stepped forward, his movements deliberate despite the whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I've spent my life connecting people through stories," he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his words. "Now I'm being asked to write a new story, one that could change everything we know about connection, vulnerability, and what it means to truly live." He took a deep breath, meeting Seraphina's galaxy-filled eyes with unwavering determination. "Yes, I'll do it. Not just for humanity, not just for your people, but because I believe in the power of connection to transform us all." The Queen's hands descended upon the console, initiating a sequence of events that would ripple through the stars. Yet before she could complete the transmission, a sudden disturbance rippled through the chamber. The crystalline walls darkened, and a figure materialized in their midst, a member of Seraphina's council, his form radiating disapproval so strongly it manifested as visible waves of distortion in the air. "Hold!" the counselor commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "New information has come to light that may affect your decision." He fixed Daniel with a penetrating gaze that seemed to strip away layers of his being. "Our sensors have detected anomalies in your genetic structure. Patterns that suggest your lineage contains traces of ancient luminary DNA. This changes everything." The revelation hit like a supernova, illuminating connections and possibilities that had lain dormant for millennia. Seraphina's hands froze above the console, her eyes widening as galaxies within them aligned in previously unseen configurations. "Explain," she demanded, her voice carrying both command and something approaching wonder. The counselor inclined his head respectfully. "Long ago, during our species' early explorations, there were encounters with primitive human populations. We believed these interactions to be inconsequential, their genetic impact negligible. Yet now we see evidence of luminary heritage in this human's DNA, a heritage that has lain dormant until awakened by proximity to pure luminary genetics." He turned his attention back to Daniel, his expression unreadable. "You are not merely human, Daniel Harper. You are something more, a bridge between our species written into the very fabric of your being." The chamber's atmosphere shifted dramatically, charged particles dancing in complex patterns as the implications sank in. Seraphina approached Daniel, her movements slower now, filled with newfound reverence. When she reached out to touch his cheek, the contact sent amplified waves of sensation through both their bodies, stronger than any previous connection they had shared. "This explains much," she whispered, her voice trembling with revelation. "The ease with which you understood our concepts, the depth of your insights into our condition, the resonance between us. It was not coincidence but destiny written in our shared genetic code." Her hand remained against his face, tracing patterns that seemed to unlock memories and connections buried deep within his ancestral heritage. Daniel felt the truth of her words resonate through him, awakening dormant aspects of his consciousness. Vague memories, not his own but somehow familiar, surfaced in his mind. Visions of starships descending through ancient skies, meetings between beings of light and shadow, promises made and broken across generations. He staggered slightly, overwhelmed by the influx of inherited knowledge and emotion. The counselor watched their interaction with growing intensity. "This changes the nature of our agreement," he declared. "No longer is this merely a political alliance or an experiment in cultural exchange. This is a reunification of bloodlines, a restoration of connections severed by time and evolution." He addressed Seraphina directly. "Your marriage to this human would represent not just a union between species, but a healing of ancient wounds, a completion of circles begun millennia ago." Seraphina's eyes blazed with renewed purpose, galaxies within them swirling in patterns that seemed to reflect the very birth of stars. "Then it is decided," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Daniel Harper, you are not merely a representative of humanity, but a living testament to the interconnectedness of all beings. Our union will serve as a beacon, guiding both our peoples toward a future where differences are celebrated rather than feared, where ancient connections are honored rather than forgotten." As she spoke, the chamber responded to her conviction, walls transforming into displays of intertwined DNA strands, human and luminary, dancing together in cosmic ballets. The counselor bowed deeply, his earlier disapproval replaced by something approaching reverence. "May this union bring enlightenment to us all," he intoned before fading from view, leaving Seraphina and Daniel alone once more. The queen turned to face her future partner, her expression a complex tapestry of emotions that transcended simple categorization. "We are more than we knew," she said softly, her hand still resting against his cheek. "More than either of our species understood. Together, we have the chance to rewrite not just our futures, but our pasts, to heal divisions that began before recorded history." Daniel found his voice, though it emerged altered by the revelations. "Then let's begin," he said, his words carrying the weight of countless generations. "Let's create something new from what was lost, something that honors both where we've been and where we're going." Their eyes met, and in that moment, they both understood that their journey was just beginning. A voyage not just through space and time, but through the very essence of what it meant to connect, to belong, to be part of something greater than oneself. The chamber's crystalline walls began to pulse in time with their synchronized heartbeats, creating a symphony of light and sound that seemed to echo through the fabric of reality itself. Outside, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, unaware that their patterns were being rewritten by the choices of two beings standing on the threshold of destiny. Seraphina took Daniel's hand, their fingers intertwining with a resonance that seemed to harmonize the cosmos. "Let this be our first step," she whispered, her voice echoing through the chamber like a promise etched into eternity. Around them, the crystalline walls shimmered with newfound energy, as if the universe itself acknowledged the significance of their bond. The council's earlier warnings and doubts dissolved into insignificance, replaced by an overwhelming sense of purpose. Daniel felt his human heart race in sync with Seraphina's luminous essence, their connection transcending biology and destiny alike. Together, they turned toward the console, ready to transmit their decision, a union not just of two beings, but of two legacies intertwined across time and space. As their hands hovered over the controls, the stars beyond the chamber seemed to align, casting light upon a future neither could fully foresee. "For all who come after us," Seraphina murmured, her galaxy-filled eyes meeting his with unshakable resolve. And with that, they transmitted their choice, sealing a pact that would ripple through galaxies and rewrite the story of connection itself.